About a month ago, when summer was just at its end, my friend Rose and I decided to go for a drive up to the mountains. I grew up nearly out of the city limits and drove the mountain roads often. Rose is a newer friend in my life and had only been up the mountains maybe a few times. So I was eager to show her how cool it was at night, especially when you're headed back to town and you can see all of the city lights as you're leaving the foothills. Now, I love listening to creepy videos and watching scary movies, which may have been a big help for Rose and I on this particular night. So we headed up in my van, a dependable 2003 Toyota, who had made the journey with me dozens of times before. There's a part where the pavement ends and the gravel road takes you deeper into the mountain, and just beside this stretch of asphalt to gravel is a stretch of dirt that people use to park their trucks and trailers. Rose and I drove by, and I noted that the pullout was empty, as was normal for this time of night. It was 10 p.m., the sun had set, and the lights with timers had all turned on in town. I'd never seen any lights up in the mountain, though. Almost every farming field on the mountains is fenced off with a locked gate that will say private property, normally too with bullet holes in the middle to show that the owners are armed and generally are pretty ticked off at idiots that try to break into their fields. Every field in the mountains is watered with a center pivot irrigation system too. Those are the sort of long, repeatedly arched systems with metal frames and wheels. They're commonly seen all over the United States agricultural districts. I'd seen a few irrigation systems in town that have lights with timers on them, so at first I wasn't too surprised when I saw one light in a field. We'd only gone maybe a quarter of a mile in by now, but then I remembered that not only had the light not been there before, it was actually in the wrong place. I sighed, which was probably not what Rose wanted to hear in the middle of our first nighttime mountain excursion. Rose asked, "What's up?" "Well, I know farmers are harvesting now, so I guess a light in a field makes sense, but at the same time, I've never seen that one before," I say, gesturing off to our right, where there's a very random amber light off at the edge of the field. It's dark enough that I can't see any of the fences or any of the boulders around it, but I was familiar enough with the mountains to know that it was the edge of the property. I started to tap on the wheel anxiously as I was filled with mixed emotions. I was eager to keep going because the mountains were going to be beautiful in the half moon, and Rose had never seen them at night before, like I said. But at the same time, my brain told me that if I'm going to listen to a few dozen hours of horror stories per month, I'd at least better get some meaning out of them. So I say, "I'm sorry, Rose, I would keep going. Those were tractor headlights, I think, but I've never seen just one headlight right there, especially in that field. I've never even seen it farmed, so it wouldn't make sense to waste energy or money lighting it." Rose is amazing and didn't mind that we were turning around, only a quarter of a mile in. We turn and we head back towards the asphalt. I had no idea why, but I felt like there was a clock that had suddenly started ticking. "Hey Rose, could you please hold the handle? I'm going to go fast enough that you might want to hold on to something. I promise that we're safe though, okay?" Rose silently clutched the handle above the passenger side of the door, and I went faster. I felt the sense that it was time to hurry up, so I did. I zoomed back towards the asphalt as fast as I dared, my sense of trepidation only intensifying when we finally reached the truck parking zone. And there was a white truck and a flatbed trailer that had not been there less than 10 minutes before this. And 5, maybe even 6 guys were around the truck that had its headlights on. One guy was in a UTV, backing it off the flatbed trailer so fast that I thought that he was going to crash into one of his friends. I raced by and somebody ran behind the car. I quickly turned onto a road that would lead to the main road. "Rose?" I asked, while inclining my way up to 70 miles per hour. "Were those people there when we drove by earlier?" I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't crazy. "I'm pretty sure they weren't," Rose said evenly. I sighed, copying her tone, even as I jumped up to 75 and glanced in my rearview mirror. As far as I could tell, they weren't following us, which was good, but we had 8 miles of straight, flat roads with no cover before we actually managed to reach civilization again. "Did they seem like they were in a hurry to you?" There was no other traffic, so we didn't have to slow down for anyone, which helped us both remain as calm as possible. Just a bit, she said nervously, looking over her shoulder to check if any cars were following us. Thankfully, nobody came, and we drove to a crowded restaurant and sat in the car while we calmed down. We tried to think of a reason why those guys would have shown up so abruptly in the middle of the night like that. Rose suggested that maybe their friends were camping and were in trouble, but all of the land in the mountains are private property, so nobody camps there. All I can say is that I'm glad that Rose and I left, so we didn't have to find out why 6 guys decided that they needed to rush up the mountain in the middle of the night and chase our car like that. When I was in college, I got a job delivering pizza late at night. Typically, I would work until about 2 in the morning. It was a pretty terrible job, I admit, and the shop was extremely dirty, unsanitary, and falling apart, but I typically made really good tips, so it was sort of worth it. I was 19 at the time, female, and it's summertime in CO, so even at night it's still fairly warm. Important details for later. So this is my second weekend on the job. I was still getting used to it, and I'm already a bit paranoid as a person, so I preferred just dropping off the pizza, taking my tip, and then leaving right away for the next delivery. I pretty much never went inside the person's house, and if I did, I would just step inside real quick, but leave the door open. Now, it was pretty close to midnight when I got a delivery to a house on the east side of town. It was supposed to be my last delivery of the night. I pulled up to the house, and it looked pretty normal from the outside. The street was really dark, but I didn't feel uncomfortable or anything, so I walked up to the door and knocked. This big shirtless old dude with a beer belly answers the door and tells me to come inside, and instantly I got weird vibes from him off the bat. I declined to come in and tried to just give him the pizza right there, but then he goes, "Come inside, it's freezing out and we don't want the cold air coming in." This didn't make sense to me as it was summer, but I stupidly get nervous and I take one step inside the house, not going all the way in though. Then he goes, "No, come all the way in, it's cold out." I know that I should have left at this point, but I was freaking out, not thinking straight, so I went in and he closed both the screen door and the main door behind me. I'm trying to calm myself down, telling myself that I'm just overreacting. He then tells his wife that the pizza's here. I can see her in the kitchen cooking, which seemed weird that she ordered pizza but was also cooking. I don't know. People do weird things. I look around the living room and it's filled to the brim with stuffed animals, completely covering the couches, tables, windowsills, everything, and it just gave me a really weird vibe. Then his wife comes into the living room holding something outstretched in her hand. She walks up to me and I see that it's some kind of bread or cake, and she goes, "Eat this banana bread, and don't worry, it's not poisonous." And what the heck, right? I try to politely decline, lying and saying that I'm on a diet. She just stares at me, still with her hand outstretched, waiting for me to take the bread. I don't take it, and then she gets really upset and starts yelling at me to eat the bread. I decline again, but this time I'm not trying to be polite, and I tell the couple that I really better get going back to work. I'm still holding the pizza too and thinking about just running out the door at this point. But she gives up on trying to make me eat this bread and walks back into the kitchen. Then the man is like, "Let me find some change for your tip." And he starts looking all around the living room, digging through the couch cushions, trying to find change to give me. I tell him to forget about it and that I don't need the tip, that he can just take the pizza, but he insists on finding a tip for me. He spends the next several minutes searching his stuffed animal-infested living room for change, and I start to think to myself that I think they're trying to stall me here. Most people have the tip ready when I get to their house, you see, so this was really weird. I was so worked up at this point too that I just tell the dude that I'm leaving and I start to open the door. He took his pizza and gave me a few quarters that he found, and I booked it out of there and went back to the shop. I told my supervisor when I got back what happened, and he didn't seem to care one bit. He just sent me on another delivery, and that was that. I was pretty ticked off by that, but I don't know. If that couple was actually creepy, or maybe they were just socially awkward, and I don't know what the heck was going on, but luckily I never delivered to that house again, which I'm very thankful for. So, I briefly lived in a 300-year-old farmhouse that was actually famous for being a key property in the Underground Railroad in Indiana. There were a lot of creepy things that happened while we were there, but here's some of the things that I can remember. So, my mother collected glass angels, and one night we woke up to her freaking out because every single angel in the house, probably close to like 100, were turned 180 degrees around and faced away from the center of the room. She would normally only have them face to the center of the room, so this was really weird. On another occasion, my sister and I both saw the same extremely tall, thin man in a baggy coat walking around in the hallways at night. We didn't even know that we both saw him until almost a decade later when we were just talking about stuff that happened there and we both mentioned it. My aunt actually came over once and was stirring her coffee with a spoon when the spoon stopped on its own and started stirring in the opposite direction. My dad too had set his coffee down on the table one day, and when he walked back into the room, the coffee was, as he described it, aggressively stirring itself, like the metal spoon was upright in the air and everything. This one still bothers me to this day too because it's extremely weird. The house would never go cold, but it would get extremely hot all of a sudden before returning to normal temperatures, specifically upstairs in my sister's room. There was also a hidden room behind a bookshelf and under a fake floor where slaves crossing into Indiana would hide. This is the only writing on the house I remember reading, and I specifically remembered seeing claw marks on the walls of that room. To be fair, it was an old house, and who knows what kind of critters have been down there, so it's a bit of an iffy one, for sure. But things would get knocked off shelves and furniture would move almost constantly. We had a center coffee table with pull-out stools, and the stools would be found all over the place all the time, even on top of the table sometimes. The top floor of the house burnt down in the 70s, and no one was injured or died in the fire, but they did have to rebuild the upstairs, and on the stairway up to the second floor there was a distinct portion of the wall where the house was obviously rebuilt. It went from like brick to drywall right at that spot. Oh, and I almost forgot, but this was a really big one too. When we were looking at the house before moving in, before we even walked in, my sister said, "Did someone die here?" And it turns out that somebody did die after falling off the ladder and cracking their head on the little walkway up to the front door. I remember my mum thinking too that it was super weird when she found out what had happened. And really, that's pretty much it. I don't distinctly remember hearing voices, seeing shadow creatures, or anything outside of these exact events. I've just been thinking about it a lot recently, and I figured that I would share it with you guys. And I'm down to hear your theories if you guys would like to share, but either way, thanks for listening. I was in the kitchen the night before last, washing up some plates from dinner, when I glanced out the window in front of the sink and I saw someone standing at the far end of my yard. From what I could tell, it looked like a man of average build with a scruffy appearance. He was essentially behind my neighbor's tool shed, which is right on the border of my property, and so I thought that he might be somebody that they knew. It was dark though, and he was quite a distance away, so I couldn't really see what he was doing. His back was mostly turned to me as well, but by his movement, it looked like he was patting the ground with a shovel, as if he'd just buried something and was covering it up with dirt. This definitely raised my suspicions a bit, and so I called my neighbors to ask if they were aware that there was someone behind their shed. They said that they were not, and the husband went outside to investigate. I saw my neighbor open his door, and the man saw or heard it and bolted off into the woods. I went outside to meet my neighbor and see if there was evidence of what the man had been doing, so we both arrive at the same spot, and I tell the neighbor that the man fled, and the neighbor says that he saw him running away. We look down at the ground, and There is indeed fresh dirt where someone was digging. The neighbor gets the shovel, which the man dropped when he ran off, and starts digging it back up, nervously because we were both expecting something gruesome, no doubt. However, what we dug up has left us with more questions than answers. It was a plastic bag with something softball-sized and heavy inside. We dump out the contents, and it's a rock painted red and a small smiley face button on it, the kind you pin on your shirt. And why would somebody be out trespassing on someone's property in order to bury a painted rock and a button? And yes, it's definitely paint on the rock, not blood. It's not a murder weapon as far as we can tell. Still, the neighbors and I reported it to local law enforcement, and they came and they took a statement. They took the rock and the button too, just in case it turns out to be connected with a crime. The whole ordeal has me a bit on edge, to be honest, but why else would someone bury something like that in the dark? The police combed the woods last night too, and they did come across something which makes this whole thing even more unnerving. They found a spot about a mile behind our homes in the woods where it appears that someone may have been living. I live in a pretty small town in a more rural area, and a lot of people here hunt deer and turkeys and the like. The spot that they discovered apparently had been an old lean-to type shelter that had been used at one point for hunting, but probably had been abandoned for a while when whoever found it and decided to live there. In the spot there were some old blankets, a recently used fire pit someone had made, and a few other things like food and wrappers and plastic plates and a small cooking pot. There was also something, though, that freaked my neighbor and I out quite a bit. The guy had a portable kerosene heater unit, and it was the exact portable kerosene heater that went missing from my neighbor's shed almost a year ago. So at this point, we believe this guy has been living there for quite some time. However, no one in the area has reported to have seen anyone like him around, or had any other incidences so far, but police are still in the process of talking to the other neighbors in the area. It does appear that he's left the spot at this point, but there's no being certain that he won't return. In the meantime, I'm staying at my sister's in a neighboring town, and my neighbors are staying with their adult children. My neighbor and I are going with the police escort back to our homes to set up security cameras and the like later today as well. I really don't want to go anywhere near there tonight, but it might be the only hope that we have of catching this guy and putting everyone's minds at ease. The police are taking this matter pretty seriously as well, because many years ago we had a case of a homeless man in the woods who attempted to abduct a young woman. So between that and being a small town, this sort of thing really rattles us a lot. They're trying to track down the film used for the camera, or where it came from rather, but they suspect that it may be an older camera and film, and if the man was homeless, it's likely that he just found it. As for the cause of death for the kitten that they found, they're running tests as we speak, but the vet's initial thought is that it looks like it was poisoned. This doesn't necessarily mean that it was killed intentionally. It could have just accidentally eaten something that someone set out as bait for rodents and whatnot, and the man could have just found it that way. Who knows? But it definitely hadn't been dead long when the man had it, because rigor mortis had not yet set in at the time. Meanwhile, too, the whole neighborhood is aware and have been alerted by authorities to be wary and keep their eyes peeled for anything or anyone suspicious. The police do believe that they may actually have a lead as well. A man fitting the general description of our guy is actually pretty familiar to the local gas station convenience store clerk, and as soon as the clerk heard about the incidences, he called the police to tell them about the guy. I also paid the clerk a visit this afternoon on my way back to my sister's house, after installing cameras at my neighbor's and my own residence, and I spoke with him personally. It seems the man would often come into the store to use their can and bottle return, and the clerk believed that that's how the guy was making his living, by picking up bottles and cans out of people's trash and recycling and then returning them for change. The clerk says that the man told him his name was Robert and went by the nickname Robbie. The clerk believes that Robbie does have mental health problems by the way that he acts and some of the things that he says as well. It appears he suffers from paranoid delusions, maybe. The clerk said that usually he only ever spoke in short sentences when spoken to and never made eye contact. However, the clerk overheard the man rambling and mumbling to himself while returning cans one day, repeating something over and over about cleaning the dirty water where all the people keep bleeding. Aside from that rather highly unnerving detail, the clerk said that Robbie seemed pretty much harmless. But here's something that definitely puts a bit of a twist into the story, and may put your minds a little at ease, though not much, about what happened to the kitten. So, the store clerk said that maybe 2 or 3 weeks prior to my initial encounter, the man Robbie had come to the store with some bags of cans and bottles. He also had a kitten with him. It fits the description of the one that we found. The kitten seemed healthy, but a little too skinny, and the man said that he'd found it in the woods and thought that it was a stray. He asked the clerk to look after the kitten for a few minutes while he returned cans, and afterwards he purchased a small bag of dry cat food and a hot dog and cola for himself with the change. The clerk says the man seemed to really care for the kitten and even said, "He's my friend," and when the clerk asked him the cat's name, the man said that he was still thinking of one, but he thought that he might call him Frankie. Then he said something else that was definitely unnerving. The little babies, like Frankie, like kittens. Though it is possible that he meant that kittens are like little babies and not that babies like kittens. I don't know. It's worded creepily either way. So now the police and myself are thinking this quite probably is a homeless, mentally ill man, and the kitten was in fact his pet. The tests have come back that the kitten had rat poison in his system, so we think someone in the area left rodent poison out in some food to bait raccoons. We have a serious raccoon problem here. They often get into the trash and make huge messes. The kitten probably wandered off in search of food and found the poison bait, ate it, and died unfortunately. The man probably thought that it was me and or my neighbor who had poisoned the cat, for whatever reason. Maybe the location he discovered it deceased was near us, or maybe he thought that it was on purpose because he had previously buried things in our yard, which we don't have any explanation for the first items yet. But I assure you that we are not the type of people to leave poison out for innocent animals to find. We have pets of our own, in fact. However, we know that a lot of people do bait and poison the raccoons here. Either way, I think it's possible this guy might not have been doing anything truly malicious the first time when he buried the rock in the pin, but the second time, it's possible that he was angry and did mean to threaten us, because he thinks that we killed his only friend and beloved pet. But that's just speculation, and nothing is set in stone at this time. I'll close by saying this, though. Even though this is still a very serious and frightening situation, and he is still considered highly dangerous, mostly to myself and my neighbors, because he may try to do more to take revenge for what he thinks that we did, I'm also incredibly heartbroken for this man if that indeed was his pet kitten. I honestly cannot blame him for his actions if he truly is mentally ill and mostly harmless as well. If that is indeed the case as well, I do hope that they find him and get him somewhere where he can get some help. Police are still questioning local shop owners and other citizens in the area for further information. They're also searching missing persons databases to see if anyone has reported anyone fitting Robbie's description as missing within recent years, to see if they can identify him and figure out possible current whereabouts. And until then, I'll continue to stay with my sister and my neighbors with their family for as long as I can, just to be out of harm's way. The newly installed security cameras have night vision and motion sensors as well, and they're active and recording. And so, I'll keep you guys posted. So I was very young when this happened, maybe 3 or 4 years old, so I'm guessing around 97 or 98. I know your mind can implant false memories, so I don't know if it actually happened or not, but I do remember it pretty vividly. So we were living in Germany, and I shared a room with my brother who's 4 years older than I am. The head of my bed was right below the only window in the room, and one night he jumped out of his bed and ran across the room to where I was to look out the window. And this is where things seemed weird, because it was like he knew that something was out there and he needed to see it, but there was no way that he could have seen or heard anything down there at all. I got up to see what the fuss was about, and down on the street below was a man stood completely still facing the road which stretched away from where we were. He was tall and broad, and he wore a suit, a long brown overcoat, and a fedora-type hat, which made him look like someone from the 50s. But he also had no head. His hat just seemed to float. He turned and walked away from us down the street about 20 yards, stopped and turned to face the road again. 20 seconds later, he walks another 20 yards, and once again he stops and turns to the road. He did this 4 or 5 times over before he disappeared into the darkness as well. He never turned in our direction or in any other, apart from straight down the street and to the road. There were no cars or other people coming down the street when he was on it, and the atmosphere around him just seemed ghostly still, if that's the right way to say it. But the fact that my brother seemed to know that he was there is what weirds me out the most, as much as the fact that he seemed to have no head. Weirdly too, I don't remember feeling scared or intimidated. I felt more excited to see this headless man. It's one of the earliest memories that I have, and it's stuck with me ever since as well. I've never spoken to my brother about this, nor have I told anyone, but I'm wondering, has anyone else had a similar experience, or could this just all be in my head? I'm skeptical for the most part about the paranormal, so I just really don't know what to make of it. This story and the background surrounding it is going to sound mildly insane, to put it simply, but I ask that you please try to keep an open mind. Growing up, I've always been more spiritually in tune than what could be perceived as normal. As I've gotten older, that hasn't really changed. I can go into so many stories about this too, such as dreams that I've had come true, or cases of sleep paralysis in which I've seen and felt things, an encounter with what I believe to be a demon, and so on and so forth. But for this, I'm going to start off with my earliest and most prominent memory of living in a haunted house for a year and a half. If anyone's interested, I'll tell my other stories too, but for now, to the haunted house. So, I was 12 at the time. My family had moved into a house built in the 1930s, set up in a neighborhood of matching and equally old houses in a long straight street. It was a fairly dark neighborhood with tall trees, and truth be told, it was almost a cliche horror setting. But being a sheltered Catholic girl, I didn't think anything of it. I was excited to live in this new house and make new friends, and the first day in the house was relatively normal. The movers would arrive the next day with all of our respective furniture, so for that day we had our mattresses, some plates, utensils and food, and I wasn't really bothered by the house at first, or maybe I was just too blinded by my excitement to really notice things. I don't know. But this all changed when night came. I went to my empty room where my mattress was, as well as a few personal items laid out, and started to make my bed. The layout of the room was fairly simple. My bed is in the right-hand corner of the room with the doorway right across from it. My closet was on the wall that my bed was pressed to, so I could see its trim and outline from my bed, but not inside of it, if that makes sense. The closet also had a door, and for whatever reason, the closet bothered me, even the first day. I can't really explain it, but I just didn't bother putting my clothes away, as I was too uncomfortable with it. But weirdly, I also couldn't shut the closet door. I just didn't want to go near it, even if it meant giving myself comfort by not having it open. Like I said, I just can't explain it, and it gave me bad vibes, but being 12, I just kind of shrugged it off as standard anxiety. You know, oh my goodness, a closet's are scary, monsters are under the bed sort of stuff. I figured the fear would just go away eventually. When bedtime neared, though, I realized that I had no lamps in my room, with the only light being from the overhead fan. The thought of being in the room in total darkness definitely left me with a bad and terrible feeling, so I decided that I would sleep with my bed door open and the hallway light on as well. I didn't want my parents to assume that I was being babyish, so I justified it in case I woke up and needed to go to the bathroom, get water, etc. I didn't know the layout of the house, and I didn't want to fumble in the darkness to turn my light switch on. My parents understood, so great. At the time, I had a golden retriever who was the light of my life. She was my childhood dog who always slept in my room, usually on my floor or bed. And when I was ready for bed, I took a treat and I brought her in with me. I tried to bring her to my mattress with me, encouraging her with words and food. But as soon as she entered my room, she just whirled around and left. I tried to bring her in my room with me several times, but always to the same result. My mum said that the dog was probably just anxious due to the move, and in the end I accepted that. So I just tried to sleep alone that night. But I couldn't sleep though. I laid in my bed, bundled in my blankets. Coming from a conservative Catholic family, my brain never once jumped to the idea of ghosts or spooky things. I had no idea what I was feeling, but one thing was just crystal clear. While I was alone, I truly didn't feel like I was. I glanced periodically towards my closet, noting how it felt as if something was peering around the corner at me. I didn't see anything, but it felt as if something was there and watching me. I could only stare back before trying to fall asleep, and sleeping in that room was just impossible. After we received our furniture, though, I immediately set up my lamp on my desk on the end of the room that I would use as a nightlight. I refused to sleep in my room in darkness. Bear in mind, though, that I had outgrown sleeping with a nightlight by 6, so being 12 years old and insisting my light be on for me to sleep warranted eye rolls from my parents. They thought that I was being ridiculous, especially since I had no explanation as to why. How could I explain what I was feeling? I couldn't, because I didn't even understand it. But in the end, they didn't argue with me, and they just let me do it. By night, I'd turn my lamp on, burrow myself into my blanket, and just try to ignore that terrible feeling of something watching me. I didn't put any clothes in my closet, and I kept it in my dresser, even if it didn't make sense for dresses, jackets, and so on. I put a Harry Potter poster on the door to make it friendlier, as if a protected barrier to provide comfort. And I remember one night, I was laying on my side, just staring at the wall. I was curled up and bundled in my blankets in my safe burrito form, only my face peeking out so that I could breathe. And for whatever reason, something compelled me to look up, so I did. And in a slow, almost leisurely movement, I saw the shadow of what looked to be a person move across the wall. I didn't process it fully at the time. I tried to justify it in the moment as being the fan's shadow, but as an adult, I look back and I honestly shudder recalling the distinct features of a nose, a chin, and even a hunched back. Another night, curled in my bed, I thought that I saw movement at the end of it, a shadow really ducking downwards, and I don't know what compelled me to do this, honestly. Maybe 12-year-old me was brave or an idiot, but I pulled myself out of my burrito form and moved across my bed to peer down at the end of it, as if I would see someone hunched there, or my dog, or anything. When I did, I saw nothing, of course. But the shadow was just so distinct and so dark, and I knew something had to have been there. I curled back into my blankets and I tried to sleep. One other night, though, this time not in my room, I went to my parents' bedroom to retrieve some cough medicine from their cabinet when I heard something so distinct that it gave me pause. There was a tap from inside the walls, and this took me off guard, so I turned to look to the wall where it was coming from. The tapping persisted, quiet and slow at first, but gradually began to build in sound. This may sound ridiculous, but I'm willing to put my hand on a Bible and swear on my soul, but I swear to you that I saw the walls move, as if something was pressing against it. It slithered up the wall and into the ceiling as if trying to break out, and as if the wall were made of softer substance. I began to sob and I ran downstairs. My dad was away on a business trip and my mum was asleep on the couch. She had taken some medication because we were both sick, so she was passed out cold. I tried to shake her awake, begging her to wake up, telling her that I believed someone was upstairs, but she just wouldn't budge. I ran upstairs back to her room, and the horror persisted. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I ran into my parents' bed, burrowed under the covers, and I could have run, but being in my room was no comfort, and I was afraid of every other room in the house, so I stayed under the covers until the tapping stopped, and then I dragged my dog into the room with me and shut the door. And that night, she just cried and whined the whole night, sometimes pawing at my door, but I was too afraid of being alone, and I cried myself to sleep that night. Something lived in that house, and I don't know what it was or if there was more than one thing. When I reflect on living in that place, I also reflect on how every night was just a hellish nightmare, and how every sleepover at a friend's house away from it was a breath of fresh air. Moving from that house gave me great relief, but we moved into a new home for a while that was beautiful and bright, and I slept like I'd never slept before that first night, safely and with relief. And my dog even slept in my room with me willingly that night too. But that old house, I'll never, ever forget it, and its other occupants. To preface this, I'm a 30-year-old wife, mother, and Marine Corps veteran. I practice and help instruct Taekwondo and Krav Maga, and honestly, never in a million years did I expect something like this would ever happen to me. But last night, it did. And I hope that this is the right place to get this off my chest. So last night, I went to Walmart's to do some grocery shopping. On my way into the store, I noticed a shady-looking beat-up grey sedan circling around the parking lot and not parking. I found it odd, but brushed it off and went into the store. After I finished shopping, I came out of the store and noticed the same car still circling. It was odd for sure, but not enough to make me put up my guard or anything. I unloaded my groceries in the car, took the cart back to the cart corral, and when I entered my car, I got a really strong urge to immediately lock my doors, even before I started my car. And almost instantly after I did this, that same sedan whipped up, partially blocked me in so that the only way that I could get out was to reverse. And it was a middle-aged man, and his window was rolled down, and he was yelling at me. What made me nervous, though, is that both of his hands were in his pockets. I couldn't be sure if he was just weird and cold, or if maybe he had something in those pockets. So I didn't want to take my eyes off of his hands, which made it hard for me to back up. So I rolled down my window an inch and asked him what he needed. Stupid, I know. But he said that he needed help and that he couldn't hear me well, so could I open my door? I asked him what he needed help with, and he started yelling at me to just open my effing door. At that point, I put my car in reverse and chanced a glance at my backup camera, during which time he had gotten out of his car and was now at my door, trying to yank at the handle, still yelling at me to open my door. I tore out of there so fast that I'm surprised I wasn't actually stopped by the cops. I found a crowded, well-lit parking lot and instantly called the police, who thankfully took me seriously and went to take a look. But by that time, the man was long gone. I know nothing happened, and perhaps I shouldn't still be shaken up over it, but that encounter just really shook me, and I just wanted to share this, so thanks for listening. So, before I get into this story, I know the generic answer to these stories is sleep paralysis, and although I do have that issue sometimes, this is definitely different. So when I'm on my way to sleep and I finally find a comfortable position to lay, I usually can only sleep if I'm faced towards the middle of the bed. This thing will come up and I can feel my bed react to something climbing onto it because it sinks down a bit. It then proceeds to just kind of lean over me and breathe as close to my face as possible, and I can literally feel it. When I don't react to that, open my eyes for instance, I can feel it get off the bed from behind me and get back onto the other side so that we're face to face. I know this because I can feel the bed react again to it getting on the other side and now feel the breathing right in front of my face instead of over me. Plus, you know when someone gets really close to your face and you can feel the heat coming off of their face? I can feel that too, and lastly, with still no reaction from me, it gets off the bed again, but I know it's still there, just from that feeling that you get from someone staring at you. Now, like I said, I know that there's a lot of people who will think that, of course, this is just sleep paralysis. The whole story is pretty generic to exactly that for the most part. But this is why I don't think that that's what it is, because I can move. I'm not immobile, and it doesn't feel like anything is holding me down. I know that I can move because I'm so used to sleep paralysis that I know how to check for it, as this is how I usually transition to a lucid dream. that's a whole different story. Also, the way that I sleep, I have one hand under me, usually under my pillow, so I just open and close my hand a few times to confirm that I can actually move. This works for me in my head because if there is something there, I can move a little without it knowing. I then move my legs up to get into a fetal position just to make sure that my feet are not hanging off the end of the bed. Too many stories regarding that. But now that I know that I can move, this is where I start to get nervous because now I have to actively try to keep my eyes closed since I've confirmed that I'm actually awake, and it seems to be right in front of my face at this point. I can literally feel the sweat coming out of my pores and my entire upper body because I'm just so nervous. What I've done the last few times when I know it's not on the bed anymore and I'm drenched in sweat to the point that I need to move off of the sweat spot, I just say screw it and I jump up from the bed and yell as if that's going to do anything, but when I do though, of course, there's always nothing there. I'm 31 years old and this isn't new to me. I have a theory that it might be related to a lady that sometimes haunts my dreams. Since I was in pre-K, that's another story for another time again. It also has crossed my mind that it could be my dad. That's actually worse than the first option to me. Again, another story for another time. But anyway, what do you guys think this is? And can you shed any light on the situation?